Welcome to episode 1 of the Streaming Horror Movie Podcast. Hello, I'm your host Rick Hunter, and we're going to have a little bit of fun and present a quick 5 to 10 minute overview of 3 of the very best horror movies currently available on streaming services. In this podcast and future episodes, we're going to discuss select horror films that can be found on Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and Shudder, as well as newer horror releases available for rent on demand. And when I refer to the category horror movies, I'm also including in that genre psychological thrillers and suspense films that I view and highly recommend. With this podcast, we want to help you, the horror movie fan, save time in your search for the very creepiest of movies that can sometimes get lost in the shuffle of mediocre films of the genre, of which there tends to be quite a few, as I'm sure you're aware. So let's kick off this debut episode of the Streaming Horror Movie Podcast, and we'll be discussing the following 3 films: They Come Knocking, Goodnight Mommy, and House of the Devil. First up for discussion on the Streaming Horror Movies Podcast, They Come Knocking, which is a film that came out last year, 2019, on the Hulu platform. Clayne Crawford, formerly of TV's Lethal Weapon, stars as a father who, after losing his wife to illness, takes his teen daughters on a road trip out to the wilderness in an effort to help heal from their loss. Things don't go as planned, however, when in the middle of the night there's knocking on their RV door from what appears to be black-eyed children-type figures, and their vacation rapidly goes downhill from there. I found this film holding my interest from the start to the very end in a way I find occurs less often these days, and I give it a creepy rating of 9 out of 10. And fans of home invasion type movies such as The Strangers would likely enjoy this as well. I would categorize this as horror suspense, and I do recommend it highly. Again, the film is called They Come Knocking. It was released in 2019 and is currently streaming on Hulu. And next up on the Streaming Horror Movies Podcast, Goodnight Mommy, which goes back to 2015, and it's a psychological thriller, I would classify it as. And it's a movie I've been wanting to see for a while, but never got around to it until I recently discovered its availability on Amazon Prime. And the brief synopsis: the mother of twin boys returns home after having facial reconstructive surgery, and after a few days of being home, the twins notice her behavior is a little odd, and they eventually begin to have doubts if the woman behind the bandages is actually their mother. If you've seen the trailer for this film, the movie very much lives up to the creepiness of that trailer, so Goodnight Mommy also gets a creepy factor rating of 9 out of 10. For me. And be forewarned, the movie gets a little hard to watch near the end. That's all I can say about that. Also, I should point out that this is a German language film with subtitles, which I usually find distracting from the on-screen action, but didn't find that to be the case with this film at all. Check it out on Amazon Prime, Goodnight Mommy. And the last, but certainly not the least horror film we'll discuss on this debut edition of the Streaming Horror Movies Podcast is House of the Devil, which came out in 2009. And somehow, I had never seen this movie until now, here 10 years after its release. It flew past my horror film radar, I'm embarrassed to admit, considering how freaky good the movie is. And the plot, which is set in the 1980s, has to do with a young lady who accepts what was advertised as a babysitting job, but it turns out she learns she'll be taking care of the elderly mother of the homeowner, and from there things take quite the dark turn. That's pretty much the plot in a nutshell. I prefer not to give away anything else, but I will say that this film is a must-see for horror fans if you missed it the first time around like I did. Currently streaming on Amazon Prime, be sure to check it out. And that wraps up this first episode of the Streaming Horror Movie Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the reviews I've offered. Thanks so much for listening, and if you have any suggestions for streaming horror movies you highly recommend, please let me know so I can check them out and possibly talk about them on a future episode. And on future episodes, we're going to be discussing Ghost Stories, Southbound, The Possession of Michael King, as well as many others.